Hi, this is Pamela from the Fiber Sprite, and today I want to show you how I pick up dropped stitches in my knitting without using a crochet hook. This technique is easier for me because I find that using a crochet hook to pick up my dropped stitches is a little bit frustrating, for me at least. And I also find that I really don't want to go digging around looking for a crochet hook. I just want to get my stitches back on the needle and get back to knitting. So this is a technique that I sort of just started doing. I figured it out. I'm sure that there are other tutorials out there that show the same thing, but I've had some requests from people I've shown this technique to so that they can have an easy reference. So this is for you, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. So if we look on the back of the knitting here, we see that there are some big loops of dropped stitches. I've dropped as many as 3 stitches in a row, and I also find that this technique is a lot more helpful for me when I have multiple dropped stitches in a single row, all next to each other, as opposed to using the crochet hook. Sometimes it gets a little bit confusing with the crochet hook. So this technique I find to be quite helpful for me. So the first thing that you'll do is you'll knit to the last stitch that has not been dropped. So if you look on the back where that loop is, that's the last stitch that has not been dropped. So I'm going to knit across to that stitch. And when I get to that stitch, it's probably going to be very loose. And so I'll just tug at that extra yarn to sort of snug it up. But that's an easy way to see that you're at that stitch, because the stitch below it is very loose because there's all that extra yarn at the back. So now I've got this stitch has several rows of dropped stitches. And so I want to look down and see which stitches have been dropped. So I have these ladders at the back that indicate dropped stitches. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and I want to make sure to keep them in order so that I'm knitting them in the sequence that they were dropped. So this first one is the one that's at the lowest point, and all I have to do is scoop up that extra loop at the back onto my left needle, and then I'll take the stitch and hook it over that loop, and that's basically just the same as knitting. I've just knit below where I normally do. So now I'm going to go to the next loop. That's this one here. Again, scoop it up onto my needle and pull that stitch over. So I've knitted that stitch. And then again for the last one, just loop it right on over, and then I will knit it. And again, it's very loose because the one next to it has been dropped. So now I'm going to go on to the next stitch, and again, this has 1, 2, 3 rows that have been dropped. So I'm going to pick up the first one onto my needle, and here I can see that I'm going to twist it if I loop it over. So I'm going to untwist it, that stitch first, loop it over, pick up that stitch, that dropped stitch, loop it over, and then the last one again, loop it over, then knit it. Okay, and so on this last dropped stitch, I've only dropped down 2 rows. So there's 1, 2 dropped stitches. So I'll pick up that first one, loop it over, pick up the second one, loop it over, and then I'll just continue knitting as normal. Now you may find that the stitches that you picked up in this technique, or even if you use the crochet hook method, sometimes your stitches will be a little bit loose after you've picked them up because you're pulling yarn away from the other stitches that are next to the ones that got dropped. So to fix that, you can take your needle, a tapestry needle, a crochet hook, whatever you can pull those stitches with, and sort of ease them around until they're about the right size. I usually like to do this at the end of a row because that makes me less likely to drop more stitches yet again. But if it works easier for you to do it at this point, that's fine too. You just want to be careful not to drop extra stitches. So then you just keep knitting like normal, and that's really all there is to this technique. Now let's say that as you're knitting, you've dropped down a couple of rows and you need to find that stitch to pick it up. So you want to make sure to pick up your stitch, and then you're going to just do the same thing that we did before. You find the first row that got dropped, pick it up onto your needle, loop it over, find the next row, loop it over, find the next row, loop it over, find the next row, and loop it over. And you just do that until you have no more left to loop over. So let's show that one more time. I'm going to drop this stitch, and you'll see that as you drop a stitch, you sort of end up with this triangle where at the top the ladders are quite wide, and at the bottom the ladders are still pretty narrow. So that can help you in identifying how many rows you've dropped down and also which one is next. So again, you're going to hook your needle underneath, your left needle underneath that dropped stitch, take your right needle and loop it over. The key here is really just to be patient and take a good look at where your stitches are coming from. And that will really help you to find where those rows are. And then once you're done, you just knit like you normally would. So that's all there is to this technique. I hope you found this video helpful. You can find me here on YouTube as the Fiber Sprite. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook as the Fiber Sprite, and my blog is fibersprite.com. I hope to hear from you soon.